In this video, we will discuss modern models of cultural competence. And I say modern because in the past, when people said they were providing cultural competence training, usually what that looked like was teaching about the group that you're going to work with. So if you move to Hawaii, you might learn about Native Hawaiians, you might learn about Micronesians, you might learn about Japanese Americans, and you're going to learn about how different family dynamics are, how different historical events have affected groups. And this is all helpful information, but it is kind of a limited view when you're talking about something like therapy. So a modern model of cultural competence is going to include 3 steps: awareness, knowledge, and skills. When we're talking about awareness, this starts with what we call cultural self-awareness. This is the ability to understand your own viewpoint and recognize that it is unique and idiosyncratic. And so this can be surprising to a lot of people that, we're learning about culture. You think it would be focused on the client's culture, but it's really important for a therapist to start with learning about their own culture. And not just the facts, like where your ancestors moved from, but the values, the assumptions, and biases that affect how you make meaning in the world. So this might come from the home you were raised in. It might come from the larger culture that your ancestors came from, but it's going to be really understanding how your ethnic group, religious group, social group has affected how you make meaning in the world. A related concept to awareness is called cultural humility. And this refers to having the attitude about diversity that is centered on the recognition of the limits of your own knowledge. So rather than saying, okay, I've read the book about how to work with this group, I'm a master at working with this group, that is not a very helpful attitude. Instead, it's this recognition that I will never know what it's like to be in part of this other group, but I'm open to learning more. And it's kind of this curiosity. It's this approach that's humble. It's recognizing that there are limitations to knowledge. And this can be difficult. It can be hard to come to terms with things like racism or classism. But it's a very important step of becoming a culturally competent person, is to develop this attitude that, okay, I accept that I will never know everything, but I am willing to kind of learn on an ongoing basis. And so I want to try an experiential exercise. So while you're watching this video, this is just kind of an exercise I'll walk you through. And this helps highlight the idea that, we all have prejudice and we will always have prejudice. But cultivating this cultural self-awareness and cultural humility can help us keep those biases in check. So I'm going to show you a series of pictures. And as you look at the pictures, I just want you to notice your first thought. You don't have to share it with anyone, just notice it. So I'm going to show you some pictures and I want you to just think to yourself, what is your first thought? Who seems hardworking to you? Who seems lazy? Who seems manipulative? Who seems honest? So just kind of noticing your thoughts as we look through the pictures. So even though you don't know anything about these people, you most likely had differing first thoughts regarding who is more hardworking, honest, and this is likely different than how other people in the class thought. And even if you had a pretty positive view of everyone, I'm guessing that your first impression of every picture wasn't exactly the same. So your own cultural upbringing is going to inform how you have like a snap judgment of somebody. And this is very normal. And part of cultural self-awareness and humility is understanding that everybody has these biases. And it's good to become aware of them, because then to effectively and equitably treat clients, it's helpful to be able to recognize these first thoughts and then address them with knowledge and skills so that they're not your final thoughts. So the second step is knowledge. And this might look kind of like that traditional method of cultural competence that I described. So it is important for psychologists to acknowledge a cultural difference with clients and develop knowledge of their clients' cultural groups. This should be kind of a continuous effort to learn more. And it's helpful to think about, where are you learning more? So, a good first step might be to read about on the internet or read some academic materials. But it can also be helpful to have discussions with the client or other people from that group. And so it's really important to appreciate the heterogeneity inherent in every culture. So what this means is that not every person in a group is exactly the same. There is a lot of variety within cultures. And so it's really important to avoid stereotyping. We can fall into that trap pretty easily, and appreciating someone's culture is a lot different than stereotyping them to that culture. And so there's this helpful idea called dynamic sizing, which is the ability to know the norm for a group, while also understanding that that norm might not apply to every person within the group. And so you're able to kind of hold both of these things at the same time, developing information about the cultural group that your client is coming from. You're not making assumptions about your individual client. The third step is skills. So one skill to cultivate is how to avoid microaggressions. And a microaggression refers to any comments or actions in a cross-cultural context that conveys prejudice or negative or stereotypical beliefs about somebody. And microaggressions often reflect the dominance of one group over another. And these can center on differences in ethnicity or race, age, gender, socioeconomic status, pretty much any kind of social group that a person can belong to that is different than yours could result in a microaggression. Other skills to cultivate, cultural adaptation of treatments. And so oftentimes treatments are developed for a particular group, and they have not been tested across all possible groups. And it can be helpful to take into account your client's specific cultural context when you're delivering treatment. So one example is guided imagery scripts. So for people who have a lot of post-traumatic stress or anxiety symptoms, they might begin a practice of guided imagery, which is where you kind of help them find like a peaceful place to imagine. So you might say like you're on a desert island, or you're in like a beautiful field of flowers, and you're really trying to cultivate a place of relaxation for them in their mind. However, when you think about this is a very like individualistic scenario, to be completely alone on a beach or in a field of flowers. And some people might feel actually more comforted to be surrounded by their friends and family or the people that they love. And so for your particular client, you may consider what is comforting to them. And you're going to be drawing from their cultural background and the information you're gathering from them to help you make that decision. There are also therapies that have been culturally adapted to fit groups. And there are a lot of research studies going on to kind of test these therapies and see if they're still effective after they've been adapted. And lastly, another area to focus on within skills is language. So we know from studies that clients who speak multiple languages might actually report different symptoms when speaking different languages. So it's really important to understand, what are they most comfortable with? Whenever possible, trying to pair someone with a bilingual therapist, getting a translator if that's going to help support the therapeutic process. And lastly, slang. So, a lot of times people will use slang to describe their symptoms, and it's really important to really keep asking questions to understand what they mean by the words that they're using. And so with all three of these components, so we have awareness, knowledge, and skills. These are the three things to really focus on when you're developing cultural competence as a psychotherapist.